that's one thing I was thinking about the adaptation funds. Really, I think there's a big opportunity there to use them in a way that is not just... I hope they don't become something independent from the Millennium Development Goals, for example.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's
Sure.
clearly mass education, addressing women's rights, various things that we know are part of the climate solution anyway, that we need to address them to tackle population growth, all sorts of things that seem so interconnected. And I guess if there's so much money that's going to be transferred around the world in a new way, that our hope, I guess, is that we get it right on this.
Absolutely, I completely agree about that. I think, what we're doing at the moment, in a way, is beginning to mainstream climate in the way that we've mainstreamed human rights issues into the, almost a sort of ethical trading. Everything that we do has a human rights component, or ought to have a human rights component to it. We need to make sure that our systems respect the rights of individuals around the world. And in a sense, what we're doing now is the same thing with climate. We're effectively climate-proofing our policies, or at least we're starting. And here there's a big, for example, there's a big component to defence and security thinking that was just not there 2.5 years ago, that's about climate security. This is something that, again, we take a very big interest in. We inspired the first UN Security Council discussion of climate and security around about 2 years ago now, and we've kept on talking about this. David Miliband and Ed Miliband, who is, a curiosity of having two brothers in the British cabinet. First time this has happened since the 1930s, but David Miliband, the Foreign Secretary, Ed Miliband, who's our Secretary of State for the Environment, Climate Change, released what we call the 4-degree map a couple of weeks ago. And the 4-degree map is the product of some very, very interesting science, 32 scientific surveys that have been done over the course of the last 6 months or so. They were released in September at a conference in Oxford, and the 4-degree map was the product of this. And what that does is to look at what would happen in the world in the event of a 4-degree temperature rise. And a 4-degree temperature rise would be what would happen, basically, we think, if we didn't do a deal in Copenhagen or shortly afterwards. And a 4-degree temperature rise, a lot of us think, well, is that really very serious? Sitting here in Stockholm tonight, would it really be terribly serious if it was kind of 9-10 degrees rather than 4 or 5 degrees? But, of course, the world's climate is a very, very complex system. And a 4-degree global rise doesn't actually mean a uniform 4-degree rise around the world. What this science shows is that a 4-degree rise means a 14-degree rise in Greenland, which would be sufficient to melt the Greenland ice cap. It's perhaps not the best thing to say how many years that would take, but it would happen very, very quickly. And this, of course, would lead to extremely dangerous levels of global sea level rises. Similarly, a 4-degree rise actually means something like a 7 or 8 degree rise in the Amazon basin, with catastrophic effects for the world's lungs, and so on, and so on. And the reason we released this map and have now started to use it is to demonstrate that there is a contrary case. There is a real reason why we have no choice but to act, and we're going to continue to show this and to encourage people to think about it, because what it does, to come back to the beginning, is to show also where the climate and security begin to interact. Once you create the levels of desertification that happen as a consequence of a 4 or 5 degree rise in the Sahara region, in Sudan, in southern Africa, once you begin to look at the population movements that would necessarily happen as people went in search of food and water, you begin to see the very real consequences for the world's security. It's not just about climate, it's about everything. And that's why we have to be really serious about Copenhagen.
Right. Is it right that, I've seen just in the last 6 months a lot more talk about, for example, climate justice as a term, and it's very much connected there to think of it, like these global changes, if that 4-degree map happens, the question is, back on human rights as well, like we have such inequality in the world today, and I'm just wondering how even the idea of human rights is being addressed in Copenhagen. Is that coming up? Is it coming up through the targets that countries are being asked to set? Is it coming up through the... I feel that some of the countries may not even be aware to the extent that even in their businesses or in their population, how they're going to be affected.
I think there's there's an element of this really at the heart of the agreement that's about climate equity. Yep. There's about, because what we talked throughout the process about common but differentiated responsibilities, and in a sense that is code for a question of responsibility. And the developing world, the tragedy of climate change is that once again, those who are most affected are those who are least able to deal with it. It is actually the developing countries in the world that will feel the consequences most directly and most quickly. And yet it's the developed countries that bear the responsibility for having created this problem in the first place. We are responsible. The United Kingdom, I think I've mentioned this on this program before now, the United Kingdom has actually produced more carbon than any other country on the planet. Why? Because we had our Industrial Revolution sooner than anybody else, and we've continued from there. So, actually, there is a responsibility, and this agreement is about, all of us that are responsible taking that responsibility seriously, and that's where these massive transfers of financing actually bite. But you're right. In a sense, this is this is the tragedy of this problem, that it will be the poor that will feel the consequences most directly and most quickly.
Another term that I just recently started hearing about is climate debt, which I think is referring to what you're describing there, that the developed world has put most of the carbon into the atmosphere that is out there causing global warming as we speak. Okay, well, we're 35 minutes into tonight's episode of Think Globally Radio. And as always, we don't have much chance to play music when we have Ambassador Andrew Mitchell here in the studio, because we have a lot of very interesting commentary and discussions. But let's take a quick break so we can have a little sip of our water here in the studio and come back with another 20 minutes or so of discussion about a lot of the issues surrounding COP15, starting just 22 days from now, as Ambassador Mitchell mentioned. I guess you have it right there in the top of your head there, exactly how many days we have to go until the COP15 negotiations start down in Copenhagen. So let's play a song in tribute to the host country of COP15, Denmark, a Danish band called Mew, and a song called Repeater Beater here on Think Globally Radio.